I still remember that night like it happened just yesterday. The air was cold. Not winter cold, but the kind that creeps under your skin and makes you feel small. The streetlights glowed weakly outside our porch, and I stood there in my housecoat, holding a grocery bag, wondering why the door wouldn't open. At first, I thought maybe the lock had jammed. It was an old house. The door had a habit of sticking sometimes. But when I tried the handle again and again, I realized it wasn't stuck. Someone had locked it from the inside. I knocked, gently at first, then a little louder. "Emily?" I called. "Sweetheart, it's me. It's Mom." Silence. The only sound was the wind moving through the trees. A few leaves rolled across the porch. Then, after a few seconds, I heard footsteps, slow, heavy ones, on the other side of the door. "Emily?" I said again, a little unsure this time. The footsteps stopped, and then I heard the soft, unmistakable click of the deadbolt. That sound, it didn't just close the door. It closed something inside me, too. For a moment, I just stood there frozen, my hand still on the knob. I wasn't angry. I wasn't even sad yet. I was confused, like my mind couldn't catch up with what my heart already knew. My daughter-in-law had locked me out of my own home. I looked down at the grocery bag in my hands, just a few groceries I'd picked up after visiting a friend. There was milk, some apples, and a pack of cookies I knew my grandson liked. My son, Daniel, usually got home late from work. I had planned to warm up dinner for him, just like always, but that night, the kitchen light was off, and through the window, I could see the living room lamp, still glowing, faintly, behind the curtain. Someone was inside. They knew I was out there, and they chose not to open the door. I don't know how long I stood there, maybe 5 or 10 minutes? Long enough for my knees to start aching, long enough for my heart to start trembling. Finally, I put the grocery bag down on the porch and whispered to myself, "It's okay. Maybe she didn't mean it. Maybe there's a reason." But deep down, I knew better. I could feel it. That quiet, heavy truth that sits in your chest when you've been unwanted for a long time. It hadn't happened overnight. These things never do. They build up little by little. A sigh here, a look there, a door that closes a second too soon. Still, even standing there in the cold, I wanted to believe this was a mistake. So I took out my phone and called Daniel. He didn't answer. Once, twice, 3 times, nothing. That was unusual. My son always called back, so I texted him, "Danny, I'm home, but the door seems to be locked from inside. Everything okay?" No reply. The street was quiet. The neighbor's porch light flicked on across the way. I could hear a dog barking somewhere far off. It was the kind of silence that makes your thoughts louder than your surroundings. Finally, I picked up the grocery bag, turned around, and slowly walked down the steps. My heart felt heavy, heavier than that bag. I didn't cry. Not then. I just felt hollow. As I walked around to the side of the house, hoping maybe the kitchen window was still open, I wasn't trying to sneak in. I just needed to understand what was happening. When I peeked through the curtains, I saw Emily sitting at the kitchen table. She wasn't crying or upset. She was scrolling through her phone, calm as ever, sipping from a cup. The grocery bag slipped slightly in my hand. I froze, unsure what to do. If she saw me, maybe she'd open the door. But she didn't look up once. I took a step back, breathing slowly, trying not to make a sound. And that's when I realized she knew I was outside. I don't know how I knew that. Maybe it was the way she glanced toward the window for just a second before looking away again. Maybe it was the way her shoulders relaxed. Not surprised, but certain. She wanted me to see her. She wanted me to understand.
That realization hit harder than any words could. It wasn't an accident. It wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a message. I remember whispering, almost to myself, "All right, Emily, I understand." And I walked away. There was a small park a few blocks down the road. That's where I went. I sat on the same bench where I used to take Daniel when he was a boy, back when all he needed was a push on the swing and a juice box to be happy. I sat there for hours, watching the lights of the houses flicker on one by one. My phone buzzed once. A message from Daniel finally came through. "Sorry, Mom. Late night at work. You okay?" I stared at the screen for a long time. I didn't know how to answer. What could I say? That his wife had just locked me out of my own home? That I didn't even understand what I'd done wrong? Instead, I typed back, "Yes, honey, I'm fine. Just went for a walk." And that was the truth. At least part of it. I was walking. I just didn't know where to anymore. As the night grew colder, I decided to call a cab and go stay with my sister, Linda. She lived about 20 minutes away. A small house, cozy and loud with her grandkids. When she opened the door and saw me standing there, she frowned immediately. "Mary, what happened? You look pale." I smiled weakly. Just needed a place to crash tonight. She didn't press right away. Linda's the kind of person who knows when not to ask questions. She just pulled me inside, made me some tea, and sat across from me while I warmed my hands on the mug. After a long silence, she finally asked, "Did something happen at Danny's?" I looked at her, eyes tired, voice barely above a whisper. "She locked me out, Linda." Her brows furrowed. "Who did?" "Emily." She set her cup down slowly. "What do you mean, locked you out?" "Exactly what it sounds like," I said, staring into my tea. "I came home, and the door was locked from inside." She didn't speak for a moment. Then she shook her head, muttering, "That girl's got some nerve." But I didn't want anger. I didn't want to feed it. So I just said, "Maybe there's a reason. Maybe she was upset." She leaned forward. "And what reason would make that okay, Mary? You've done nothing but love that boy and his family. You cook, you clean, you help with their son, you—" I stopped her with a soft wave of my hand. I don't want Daniel to be in the middle. That's all." That night, I slept in Linda's guest room, the same one where our mother used to stay when she visited. It smelled faintly of lavender and old books. I lay awake staring at the ceiling, listening to the soft hum of the heater. Every creak of the house, every rustle outside, felt like my memories playing tricks on me. And then, around midnight, I found myself whispering out loud, "Paul, if you were here, you'd know what to do." The tears finally came then, quiet ones, the kind that slip out when no one's watching. Not from anger or pity, but from the ache of realizing that love can turn into silence so easily. The next morning, Daniel called. His voice was casual, cheerful even. "Hey, Mom, Emily said you stayed at Aunt Linda's last night. Everything okay?" I swallowed hard. "She told you?" "Yeah, she said you wanted to give us some space. I didn't really get what she meant." Space. That word cut deep. I hadn't said anything about needing space, but I didn't correct him. Instead, I said, "Yes, I thought you two could use a quiet evening." He sounded relieved. "Oh, that's sweet, Mom. I really appreciate that."
And I smiled, though he couldn't see it, because even then, my instinct wasn't to defend myself, it was to protect him from the truth. That was the night everything changed. Not just for me, but for my son, too, though he didn't know it yet. What happened after that night would uncover things I never imagined, secrets I didn't see coming, and choices that would test what it really means to be a mother and to love without conditions. Because sometimes love doesn't look like what we thought it would. Sometimes it's standing outside your own home, holding a grocery bag and realizing that maybe, just maybe, it's time to let go. When I woke up the next morning at Linda's, sunlight was peeking through the curtains. It was quiet, that soft, early kind of quiet that feels almost forgiving. For a second, I forgot where I was. Then I turned and saw the unfamiliar wallpaper and remembered I wasn't home. I was at my sister's house, a guest again in a place that wasn't mine. Linda was already in the kitchen making breakfast when I walked in. The smell of scrambled eggs filled the air. She looked up and smiled softly. "Morning, sleepyhead. How are you feeling?" I tried to smile back. "I'm fine, just still a little tired." "Understandable," she said. "That must have been awful." I didn't reply. I didn't want to start the day with sadness. So I focused on stirring my coffee, watching the milk swirl inside like a tiny storm. Linda sat across from me, hands folded. "You should tell Danny the truth, you know." "I can't," I said quietly. "He'd just feel torn between us." She frowned. "You've spent your whole life putting everyone else first. Maybe it's time someone put you first." I looked at her, tears forming before I could stop them. I don't even know what that means anymore. As I drove back toward my neighborhood later that morning, my mind drifted back through the years, back to when this story really began. Because if I was being honest, that night on the porch wasn't the start. It was just the moment everything finally broke. The real story started long before Emily ever locked that door. It started with a woman who loved too much, too quietly, for too long. Paul and I met in 1984. He was charming, loud, and always laughing. The kind of man who could make a crowded room turn toward him. I was quieter, more careful with my words, more content to listen than to speak. He used to say, "Mary, you balance me out." And maybe that was true, because for the first 10 years of our marriage, we did balance each other in every way that mattered. We weren't rich, but we were happy. He worked as a mechanic, and I managed a small bookstore in town. We had Daniel 2 years after we married. He was our whole world. Paul was a good father, not perfect, but good. He had a temper sometimes, especially when bills piled up or the car broke down again, but he always came around, and Daniel adored him. Our home was small but warm. There was laughter, Sunday dinners, Christmas lights hung crooked on the porch, and for years, I believed that was enough. Love, faith, and a roof over our heads. When Daniel turned 18, he went off to college, and the house suddenly felt too quiet. Paul and I tried to fill the silence. Weekend trips, gardening, movies. But over time, we began to drift. Not because we stopped loving each other, but because sometimes life has a way of wearing love thin in places you can't see. Then when Daniel was 23, he met Emily. She was beautiful, confident, modern, and full of opinions. From the moment I met her, I could tell she wasn't like the girls Daniel had dated before. The first time she came over for dinner, she brought a fancy bottle of wine and a bouquet that looked like it belonged in a magazine. I remember standing at the sink washing dishes afterwards and telling Paul, "She's very sure of herself." He chuckled. "You say that like it's a bad thing." "No, not bad, just different." Paul shrugged. "Daddy seems happy. That's what matters." And he was happy. So I tried my best to welcome Emily. She was polite enough at first, always smiling, always saying thank you, though sometimes in a way that felt practiced. I told myself I was just being overly protective, that no one would ever feel quite good enough for my son. But as time went on, little things started to change. When they got married the year later, I was thrilled. I helped plan the wedding, baked cookies for the reception, and made sure everything looked just right. Emily seemed grateful, even hugged me once and said, "You're like the mom I never had." That made my heart swell. I thought maybe we'd finally found our rhythm. But after the honeymoon, things shifted.
Daniel called less often. Emily would answer my texts instead, short and polite. "Daniel's busy right now, Mary, but I'll tell him you called." "Thanks for the casserole, but we're trying to cut back on carbs." "Appreciate the help, but we've got it covered." They moved into our house after Paul passed. I insisted. I told Daniel, "This house is big enough for all of us. You'll save money, and I'll have company." He agreed, though I could tell Emily wasn't thrilled. At first, it was fine. I stayed out of their way, cooked dinner, kept the place tidy, spent afternoons in the garden, but I could feel it, that slow, creeping tension that lives in the spaces between words. One evening, I made chicken pot pie, Daniel's favorite since childhood. Emily came home from work, saw it on the table, and smiled thinly. "Oh," she said, "I actually picked up Thai food. Daniel texted me that he was craving it." I smiled back, even though something inside me wilted a little. "That's fine, honey. We can save the pie for tomorrow." Daniel came in soon after, cheerful as ever. "Smells amazing, Mom. You didn't have to cook." "It's okay," I said softly. "I like taking care of you." Emily looked at him, then back at me. "Well, maybe next time, let's plan meals together, just so we don't double up." Her tone wasn't cruel, but it wasn't kind either. And it wasn't what she said that hurt me, it was what she didn't say. The following months were filled with tiny moments like that, each one small, harmless on its own, but together they began to build a wall. She'd move my things around the kitchen, rearrange the living room without asking. Once, she told me she donated my old photo albums because they were gathering dust. That night, I cried quietly in my room, clutching a single photograph she'd missed, one of Paul holding baby Daniel. I wasn't angry, just erased. When I finally tried to talk to Daniel about it, he sighed and said, "Mom, Emily's just trying to make the house feel like home for all of us." But that's what hurt the most. It was my home, the one Paul and I built from nothing. Then came the grandchild, little Noah.
The day he was born, I felt a kind of joy I hadn't felt in years. When I held him for the first time, so tiny and perfect, everything else melted away. Emily was still in the hospital bed, tired but glowing. She smiled at me then, a real, genuine smile, and said, "He looks like you." For the first time, I thought maybe things would change between us. And for a while, they did. She asked me for help, called me mom, and even thanked me for watching Noah when she went back to work. Those were some of my happiest days, caring for that baby, feeling useful again. But slowly, it began to shift once more. Emily started making comments, soft, cutting ones. "Mom, maybe don't feed him that. We're trying to keep him on a schedule. Please don't fold his clothes like that. I do them a certain way. Can you not use that lotion on him? It's not organic." At first, I laughed them off, but soon the laughter stopped feeling natural. The real fracture came the day she accused me of meddling. Daniel had come home late again, tired and stressed. Emily was upset, saying he never helped with Noah at night. I stepped in gently, trying to calm her down. "Sweetheart, Daniel works long hours. Maybe he just needs a little rest." She turned to me, eyes cold, and said, "Mary, with all due respect, this is our marriage. Please stay out of it." The silence that followed was thick. Daniel didn't say a word. He just stood there, rubbing his forehead. That night, I cried again, not because of what she said, but because of what Daniel didn't. He didn't defend me. He didn't say, "Mom's just trying to help." He just stayed quiet. After that, things were never quite the same. I started keeping more to myself, spending time in the garden, knitting, visiting Linda. I tried to stay invisible in my own home until that night. The night Emily locked the door. Because now, thinking back on it, I see it clearly. That moment wasn't sudden. It was the end of a slow, careful process, one where love was replaced by convenience and family turned into obligation. I didn't realize it then, but that night was only the beginning of something even harder. Because once the door was closed, it wasn't just the house I lost. It was the version of my life I thought would last forever. After that night on the porch, something changed inside me. I stopped expecting kindness from Emily. I stopped waiting for Daniel to step in, and I stopped pretending everything was fine. But it's strange. When you've spent your whole life caring for people, it's hard to just stop. So I still cooked their meals, still watered the garden, still washed the sheets and left warm meals on the counter. I told myself, maybe she's just stressed. Maybe she doesn't mean it. But deep down, I knew the truth. Emily didn't want me there anymore. It wasn't always open conflict. No shouting, no scenes. It was the quiet kind of cruelty that seeps into your bones. The kind that makes you question your own worth, little by little. One morning, I came downstairs and found a for sale flyer on the counter. My heart froze. Daniel walked in a few minutes later, coffee mug in hand. "Danny," I asked softly, "what's this?" He looked surprised. "Oh, that? Just an idea. Emily and I were talking about maybe moving somewhere bigger, for Noah." I nodded, even though my heart ached. "This house has room for everyone," I said gently. He smiled sadly.
I know, Mom, but Emily wants something newer, closer to her office. I tried to swallow the lump in my throat. And where would I go? He hesitated, just for a second, then said, Maybe you could stay with Aunt Linda for a while until we figure things out? The words hit like a cold wind. Stay with Linda? I whispered. This is my home, Daniel. I know. It's just temporary. Don't worry, Mom. We'll make sure you're comfortable. Comfortable. That word hurt more than he realized. The next few weeks felt like living in someone else's life. Emily stopped including me in family plans. They'd go out on weekends without saying a word. I'd find out only when I heard Noah chattering about the zoo or the park after they got back. When I tried to help, Emily would say things like, "Oh, don't worry, Mary, I've got it handled." Or, "It's okay, I already asked my mom to help this time." Her mother had started visiting more often, too, always dressed perfectly, always speaking softly, but watching me with eyes that judged everything I did. I began feeling like a stranger in my own kitchen. Even the air felt different, colder, thinner. One evening, Daniel came home late again. I heard their voices from the living room, quiet at first, then sharper. Emily's voice, "You always take her side, Daniel, always." Daniel's voice, "I'm not taking sides, she's my mother." Emily, "She's not your roommate. We need space, a normal life, just us and Noah." I stood frozen in the hallway, holding the edge of the wall for balance. Her words cut deeper than any slap could. A normal life, as if my presence made theirs abnormal. After a long silence, I heard Daniel say, "I'll talk to her." Those words felt like a verdict. The next morning at breakfast, he looked tired. He wouldn't meet my eyes. "Mom," he began softly, "Emily and I were talking last night. Maybe it's time you'd take a little break. Go visit Aunt Linda for a few weeks, just to rest." I smiled faintly. "I didn't realize living in my own house was tiring you both so much." He winced. "That's not what I meant." "I know," I said, standing up. "You don't have to explain, Daniel. I understand perfectly." He reached out for my hand, but I stepped back gently. "Mom," he whispered. I forced a smile. "Don't worry about me. You two do what you need to do. I'll be fine." Then I walked out of the kitchen before he could see my tears. I went straight to the garden, my little corner of peace. The roses were blooming beautifully that spring. I crouched down, feeling the earth between my fingers, grounding myself. Paul used to say gardening was a conversation with God. Maybe he was right, because that morning I prayed silently, not for myself, but for Daniel, for him to find his way back to kindness before it was too late. Days turned into weeks. I stayed quiet, did my chores, and avoided conflict. But Emily must have sensed my silence wasn't surrender. One afternoon, she finally snapped. I was dusting the living room when she came in. "Mary," she said sharply, "can you please stop rearranging the furniture? I set it up a certain way." I looked at her, confused. "I just moved the lamp so Noah wouldn't trip over the cord." Her lips tightened. "Well, next time, please ask. This is my home now." The word "my" echoed in my head like thunder. Something inside me broke. I put the duster down and said softly, "You know, Emily, I've lived in this house for 30 years. Every nail, every brick. I helped build it. But if it makes you feel more at home to erase me,
Go ahead. For a moment, she looked startled. Then her voice hardened. That's not what I meant. Maybe not, but it's what you feel. I walked away before she could answer. That night, Daniel came to my room. "Mom," he said, sitting on the edge of the bed, "Emily told me you two had a disagreement." I sighed. It wasn't a disagreement, Daniel. It was a truth neither of us wanted to say out loud. He rubbed his temples. "Please don't make this harder." "Harder for who?" I asked quietly. "You or her?" He didn't answer. He just stood up and left the room, closing the door softly behind him. And that's when I realized sometimes silence isn't peace. It's surrender. The days that followed were heavy. Even Noah, sweet little Noah, seemed to sense the change. He'd run to me when Emily wasn't looking, wrapping his tiny arms around my legs. "Grandma, can I stay with you today?" I'd nod, pretending everything was fine, pretending the world had grown colder. But the truth is, I lived for those moments. The warmth of his hand in mine, his innocent laughter echoing through the house. It reminded me that love still existed somewhere in those walls. Then came the night that truly changed everything. It was a Friday. Daniel and Emily had gone out for dinner with friends, and I stayed home to watch Noah. We built a blanket fort in the living room, watched old cartoons, and laughed until he fell asleep. I carried him to bed, tucked him in, and went to my room. A few hours later, I heard the sound of the front door, the latch, the whisper of keys. I thought nothing of it, assuming they were home. But when I went to get a glass of water from the kitchen, I heard voices again, sharp, muffled, coming from their bedroom. Emily's voice was tense. "She's still up, Daniel. This can't go on. She's everywhere. I can't breathe in my own house." Daniel's voice was quieter. "Emily, please. She's my mom. What do you want me to do?" "Tell her to leave," she snapped. "You keep saying you'll handle it, but you never do." "I'm done living like this." There was a long silence. Then Daniel whispered, "Okay, I'll talk to her tomorrow." Emily said nothing for a while, then murmured, "No, I'll handle it myself." I stood frozen in the hallway. My chest felt tight, my hands shaking. I didn't want to hear anymore. So I went back to my room quietly and prayed. The next morning, everything seemed normal at first. Emily was cheerful, humming while she made coffee. Daniel kissed me on the cheek before leaving for work. But that night, when I came home from the grocery store, everything changed. I tried the door, locked. I knocked softly, thinking maybe it was just a mistake. No answer. I knocked again, louder this time. Finally, Emily opened the door, just a crack. Her face was calm, too calm. "Mary," she said evenly, "Daniel and I think it's best if you take some time away. You can stay with your sister for now." I blinked, not understanding. Emily, my things are inside. My room, She interrupted. We packed some of your things. The rest can stay until you decide what you want to do. I felt dizzy. Decide what I want to do, I repeated softly. This is my house, Emily. She didn't flinch. Daniel's name is on the deed now. He said you wanted him to have it after Paul passed. Her words twisted in my chest like a knife. Yes, I whispered. I wanted him to have it one day, not to take it while I was still alive. She said nothing, just handed me a small overnight bag and closed the door. I stood there for a long time, holding that bag, the night air biting my skin. Then slowly, I turned and walked down the steps. The house behind me was dark and silent. The same house that once held laughter, love, and birthdays. Now it felt like a stranger's home. I drove to Linda's that night, tears blurring my vision. When she opened the door and saw my face, she didn't ask a single question. She just wrapped her arms around me and whispered, "You don't have to explain." And for the first time in years, I let myself cry. Really cry. Not because of Emily's cruelty, not even because of Daniel's silence, but because I finally realized something I'd been avoiding for years. You can love someone with all your heart and still lose them to a life you no longer recognize. I didn't sleep that first night at Linda's. Even though her house was warm, safe, and familiar, I felt like a ghost. Every sound, the creak of the floor, the ticking of the old clock, reminded me that I no longer belonged to the place I had once called home. Linda made me tea and sat beside me. "You don't owe anyone silence anymore, Mary," she said gently. "Sometimes love turns into control. You have to see that." But how could I? Daniel wasn't a monster. He was just lost. And I couldn't bring myself to see him as anything but my boy, the same child who once ran to me crying when he scraped his knee, begging me to kiss it better. That night, as I stared out the window at the dark, empty road, I realized I had kissed his wounds all his life. Now, he had helped create mine. The next morning, Linda insisted I rest. But I couldn't sit still. I'd kept pacing, thinking about my clothes, my things, the photo albums, Paul's watch, all still in that house. Finally, I said, "I'll go back for a few things, just while Daniel's at work." Linda frowned. "Are you sure? You shouldn't face her alone." I nodded. "Don't worry, I'll be fine." When I arrived, the neighborhood looked the same. Kids on bikes, a man mowing his lawn, birds singing in the trees. Everything looked normal, but I wasn't part of that normal anymore. I parked quietly, walked up to the front porch, and tried the door. Locked. I knocked softly, no answer. Through the window, I could see movement. Emily, talking on the phone, laughing. I knocked again. This time, she turned, saw me, and froze. Then she walked to the door, opened it just a few inches, and said, "What are you doing here, Mary?" Her tone was calm, polite, the kind of politeness that cuts deeper than anger. "I just came to get a few things," I said softly. "Some clothes, Paul's watch, my photo albums." She sighed. "You should have called first. Daniel's not home." "I know," I said. "That's why I came now." For a moment, she said nothing. Then, with a tight smile, she stepped aside. "Fine, but make it quick." Walking into that house felt strange. The air smelled different. New candles, maybe. Furniture had been moved. The pictures of me and Daniel that once sat on the mantel were gone. I walked to my room, or what used to be my room. The bed was stripped. My belongings were stacked in cardboard boxes by the door. My heart sunk. She hadn't just locked me out, she had erased me. I picked up Paul's watch from the box, held it in my palm, and whispered, "Looks like our boy grew up, huh, Paul? Maybe too much." Emily appeared in the doorway, arms crossed. She said, "Do you need help carrying those?" I said, "No, thank you," still holding the watch. Her eyes softened for just a moment, then hardened again. "Mary, you need to understand. Daniel loves you, but he has a family now. He needs to focus on us." I looked up slowly. "And you think love has a limit?" She frowned. "That's not what I'm saying." "Then what are you saying, Emily?" I asked quietly. "That I'm in the way of your happiness?" She hesitated. Then she said, "You make him feel guilty. He's always torn between us. It's not healthy." I nodded slowly. "I see. So you're not removing me from your house. You're removing his guilt." She didn't reply. And in that silence, I understood everything. This wasn't about space or independence. It was about control, about making Daniel choose. I gathered my things and left without another word. As I stepped outside, Noah came running up the driveway. "Grandma!" he shouted. Emily's face went pale. "Noah, come inside." But he ignored her, wrapping his arms around my waist. "Where are you going, Grandma?" I kneeled down and hugged him tight. "Just visiting Aunt Linda for a while, sweetheart." He looked up at me confused. "Can I come?" My throat tightened. "Not today, honey, but I'll see you soon, okay?" He nodded sadly, and I kissed his forehead. Then Emily pulled him back inside, closing the door behind her. And just like that, I lost both my home and my grandson in one moment. Back at Linda's, I tried to keep busy. I baked, I read, I tended her garden, but the ache in my chest never went away. Then, one afternoon, there was a knock at the door. I opened it, and there stood Daniel. His eyes were tired, his shirt wrinkled. He looked like he hadn't slept in days. "Mom," he said softly, "can I come in?" I nodded, stepping aside. He sat at the table, hands clasped, staring at the wood grain. He said finally, "I'm sorry. I didn't know she was going to do that. She told me you left on your own." I smiled faintly. "I did after she locked me out." His face fell. "She what?" "Yes," I said calmly. "She packed my things and told me it was best if I left." He looked broken.
Mom, I swear I didn't, I interrupted gently. I know, Daniel. You didn't say it, but you let her. He looked down, shame flooding his face. You're right, he whispered. I failed you. Tears filled my eyes, but I kept my voice steady. I don't want your guilt, Daniel. I just want your honesty.
He nodded slowly. I don't even recognize her anymore, Mom. We fight all the time. Noah's confused. I thought I was doing what's best, but everything's falling apart. I reached across the table and took his hand. Love can't survive where there's fear, son. You need to decide what kind of man you want to be, one who keeps peace by silence, or one who protects it by truth. He sat there for a long time, holding my hand, saying nothing. A week later, he came back. Only this time, he wasn't alone. Emily was with him. When I opened the door, she stood a few steps behind him, eyes red, clutching her purse tightly. Mom, Daniel said, Emily wants to talk to you. I looked at her, silent. She took a deep breath. I was wrong, she said softly. I shouldn't have locked you out. I shouldn't have treated you the way I did. Her voice trembled. I was angry. I felt like I was losing control of my home, of Daniel, of everything. But I realize now I wasn't losing control. I was losing myself. I said nothing, waiting. She continued. Noah misses you. He keeps asking for you. And Daniel, he told me what you said about protecting peace with truth. I want to fix this, Mary, if you'll let me. For a long moment, I just looked at her. And in that silence, I saw something I hadn't before. Not pride, not hatred, but fear. She was scared, not of me, but of losing love. I finally spoke. Emily, forgiveness isn't about pretending nothing happened. It's about choosing to stop carrying it. Her eyes filled with tears. Then please, let me start over. A few days later, I went back to the house, not to move in, but to visit. Noah came running into my arms, laughing and crying all at once. Daniel hugged me too, and for the first time in months, the house felt like it could breathe again. Emily made tea, and though we didn't talk much, the silence wasn't sharp anymore. It was healing. That night, as I sat on the porch, I thought about everything that had happened. The betrayal, the pain, the long silence between love and truth. And I realized something simple. Sometimes you have to lose your place in someone's world to find peace in your own. Forgiveness doesn't mean returning to what was. It means freeing yourself from what hurt. The first few weeks after that day were strange, almost too quiet. Daniel called often, Emily texted short updates about Noah, and sometimes they'd stop by just to say hello. There was still distance between us, like an invisible line we didn't know how to cross yet. But at least the anger had faded, and that, to me, was a beginning. One afternoon, Daniel brought Noah over while Emily ran errands. The little boy burst through the door like a ray of sunlight. "Grandma, guess what? Daddy said I can sleep over." His excitement filled the room, and I couldn't help but laugh. "Oh, really? Then I better make your favorite pancakes in the morning."
for the first time in a long while, my house felt like home again. We baked cookies, watched old cartoons, and talked about school and superheroes. When he finally fell asleep that night, I stood by his bed and brushed the hair from his forehead. A tear rolled down my cheek, but it wasn't from pain this time. It was from gratitude. I had lost so much, but somehow I was finding my way back to love. The next morning, Daniel came by early. He looked lighter, like a man who had decided to stop running from his own shadow. "Mom," he said, sitting down with a sigh, "I told Emily I can't live in that tension anymore. We talked, really talked, for the first time in months." I smiled. "That's good, son. Talking can fix what silence destroys." He nodded. "I think she's scared, not of you, but of losing me. I should have seen it sooner. She said she's ready to go to counseling." "Marriage counseling?" I asked. "Yeah. We found a family therapist who helps couples with boundaries, parents, all that stuff." He paused. "She also said she wants to invite you to a session one day, if you're open to it." I looked at him for a long moment. "Daniel, I don't need to go if it's about me. This is your marriage." He shook his head gently. "It's about us, Mom. We're a family, or at least we should be." That word, family, it softened something inside me. It reminded me that even when love bends and bruises, it doesn't have to break forever. A few weeks later, I agreed to join one session. I was nervous walking into that quiet little office. Emily sat across from me, her hands folded in her lap. She looked tired, like someone carrying years of invisible weight. The therapist, a gentle woman named Patricia, smiled kindly at both of us. "We're not here to reopen wounds," she said softly. "We're here to understand how they happened." For a long while, no one spoke. Then Emily looked up. "I grew up in a house where my mom and grandma fought every day. When Daniel said you'd live with us, I panicked. I thought I'd lose my home like my mom did." Her voice cracked. "I took it out on you, Mary. I wanted control so badly. I forgot what love was supposed to feel like." I took a slow breath. "Emily, I never wanted to take anything from you. I just wanted to be close to my family. But I understand now. Sometimes even good intentions can feel like pressure." She nodded, tears slipping down her cheeks. "I see that now. I'm sorry for every word, every door I closed. You didn't deserve that." And just like that, the room felt lighter. Not healed yet, but open. And that was enough. After that day, things began to shift, slowly, carefully, but genuinely. Emily would call me to ask for recipes. Sometimes she'd invite me over for dinner, letting me help Noah with his homework. She even started sending me little pictures of him, his soccer games, his drawings, his goofy grins. At first, I hesitated to respond too quickly, afraid to seem intrusive. But eventually, I realized she wasn't testing me. She was rebuilding trust, brick by brick, text by text. One weekend, Emily invited me to join them for a picnic by the lake. The sun was warm, the air smelled like summer grass, and Noah ran in circles chasing bubbles. Daniel grilled burgers, while Emily laid the food out on a blanket. At one point, Emily handed me a glass of lemonade and said quietly, "I know we can't erase the past, but maybe we can start a new chapter." I smiled. I'd like that very much. It wasn't forgiveness that made that moment beautiful. It was the understanding that forgiveness isn't a single act. It's a choice you make again and again until peace feels natural. Months passed, and little by little, the cracks between us turned into bridges. Daniel looked happier. Emily looked freer. And Noah, he was just a bright little boy who loved us both without question. But more than their healing, something else changed. Me. I stopped defining myself by what I'd lost. I started painting again, something I hadn't done since Paul died. I joined a local art class and even sold a few pieces at the community fair. And I started volunteering at the women's shelter downtown, meeting others who carried stories much heavier than mine.
Each time I spoke with a woman sitting there, afraid and uncertain, I saw a reflection of who I once was, someone waiting for permission to stand again. I'd tell them, peace doesn't come when people apologize. It comes when you decide you deserve peace, whether they do or not. And every time I said it, I believed it a little more myself. One evening, months later, Daniel called me out of the blue. "Mom, can we stop by for a bit?" When they arrived, Emily was holding something wrapped in tissue paper. She smiled shyly. "We made you something." I opened it. It was a framed photo of all of us together at the lake, laughing. At the bottom, Noah had written in messy little letters, "Our family." Tears welled in my eyes. "Thank you," I whispered. "This means more than you know." Emily reached out, touched my hand gently, and said, "I know I can't change what I did, but I can promise it'll never happen again." And in that moment, I believed her. Because forgiveness doesn't always come with grand gestures. Sometimes it comes with a quiet truth and steady eyes. Later that night, after they left, I hung the photo in my living room. It wasn't just a picture. It was proof that sometimes broken things don't have to be broken. The house was still quiet, but it didn't feel empty anymore. It felt peaceful, alive. I made a cup of tea, sat by the window, and looked out at the soft glow of the streetlights. For years, I thought love meant holding on. Now I knew. Sometimes it means letting go, so something new can grow in its place. Life moved on gently and without drama. Daniel and Emily visited often. Noah grew taller, funnier, more curious about everything. And every now and then, when I walked past that framed photo, I smiled, not because everything turned out perfect, but because we learned how to start again. One evening, as I tucked that memory close to my heart, I whispered quietly to myself, "Forgiveness doesn't erase the pain, but it turns it into wisdom. Love doesn't demand control, it invites trust. And peace isn't given by others, it's built within." The night my daughter-in-law locked me out, I thought I'd lost everything. But that night was really the beginning. The night I found myself again. It's been over 2 years since that night. Sometimes, when I look back, it feels like a lifetime ago. Other times, it feels like just yesterday. The sound of that door clicking shut, the cold air, the ache in my chest. But I've come to realize that moment wasn't just the end of something. It was the start of everything that came after. I no longer see that night as cruelty. I see it as the truth coming to the surface, a truth I had ignored for too long. I was living my life trying to hold everything together. My son's happiness, my daughter-in-law's comfort, the image of a perfect family. But sometimes, when you spend your life trying to hold on too tightly, life has to break your grip to set you free. Now, my days are quieter, but in a good way. I wake up to birds outside my window, make coffee, and take a morning walk. There's no rush, no heaviness, no pretending. Just me, my thoughts, and peace that feels earned, not borrowed. I've learned to love the silence. For a long time, I thought silence meant loneliness. But now I know silence can also mean healing. It's the sound of wounds closing, of forgiveness settling into your bones. Sometimes I still think of all the what ifs. What if I had spoken up earlier? What if I had told Daniel how much I was hurting? What if Emily had trusted me from the beginning? But then I remind myself, the past isn't meant to be rewritten. It's meant to be understood. There's one particular afternoon I'll never forget. I was painting by the window, soft sunlight spilling across the canvas. Emily called, her voice warm. "Mom, can we have a little barbecue this weekend? Noah wants you to come early and help him make his famous cookies." I smiled to myself. Famous, huh? I taught him those. We both laughed, an easy, natural laugh, something I once thought would never come again. And I realized that's how healing works. It doesn't show up like fireworks. It comes softly in ordinary moments that once felt impossible. When I arrived that weekend, the backyard was full of life. Neighbors, laughter, the smell of grilled corn. Daniel hugged me. Emily handed me a plate, and Noah ran around barefoot chasing bubbles again, just like he did that day by the lake. At one point, Emily walked up beside me. "Thank you," she said quietly. "For what?" I asked. "For not giving up on us. You had every reason to hate me, and you didn't." I smiled. I had reasons to be hurt, yes, but hate? No. That only grows when love stops, and love never really stopped.
She nodded, eyes glistening. "I hope someday I can be as strong as you." I placed a hand on her shoulder. "You already are. You just needed space to see it." We stood there for a moment. Two women who had once been enemies, now learning to exist side by side. Not as perfect family, but as real people who had made peace with their flaws. That night, after I came home, I sat by the window with a cup of tea. The air was cool, soft wind brushing the curtains. I looked at the family photo hanging on the wall, the one Noah had written "Our Family" on, and I felt something inside me settle.
finally and completely. We spend so much of our lives chasing the idea of a happy family. But what I've learned is that happiness doesn't always look like we imagine. It's not the laughter in every meal or the absence of conflict. It's the ability to forgive, even when no one asks for it. It's the quiet understanding that people hurt others not always out of malice, but fear. And sometimes the ones who hurt us most are the ones who need grace the most. When I tell this story now, people often ask me, "Do you still talk to your daughter-in-law? Do you trust her again?" And I tell them this: trust isn't something you rebuild overnight. It grows back slowly, like spring after a hard winter. But yes, we found our way back. Because family isn't about perfection. It's about persistence. It's about choosing love again and again, even when it's hard. I think about all the women out there, mothers, wives, grandmothers who've been pushed aside, silenced, or misunderstood. And if I could tell them one thing, it would be this: you are not defined by the way others treat you. You are defined by how you rise after they do. You can lose everything: a home, a relationship, even trust, and still find peace inside yourself. Because peace doesn't come from what you have. It comes from who you become. Now, when I visit Daniel and Emily, there's no awkwardness left. Emily greets me with a hug. Noah rushes to show me his drawings, and Daniel just smiles like a man who's finally found balance. Sometimes we talk about that night, gently, without shame. We don't relive it. We just acknowledge it. And every time I find myself thinking, maybe that night wasn't meant to destroy me. Maybe it was meant to rebuild us, differently but stronger. A few months ago, I was asked to speak at a small women's support group at the shelter where I volunteer. I didn't plan a speech, I just spoke from the heart. I said, "There was a time when I thought being kind meant staying silent, when I thought love meant never saying no. But I learned that boundaries are love too. And forgiveness doesn't mean letting someone hurt you again. It means freeing yourself from their shadow." As I looked around the room, I saw women nodding, tears glistening in their eyes. And I realized my story wasn't just mine anymore. It belonged to anyone who had ever been hurt and still found the courage to love again. I've often wondered what Paul, my late husband, would think if he could see us now. He always believed in family, in second chances. Sometimes, when I feel the night air brush against my cheek, I like to think it's him reminding me, "You did it, Mary. You kept love alive." And maybe he's right. Not in the way I expected, but in the way that truly matters. So this is where my story ends, or maybe where it begins again. Not with pain, not with bitterness, but quiet strength. Because life doesn't promise fairness. It promises growth. And sometimes the hardest chapters teach us the gentlest lessons. If you ever find yourself standing outside a door that someone closed on you, remember this. Don't wait for them to open it again. Walk away with your dignity, your grace, and your heart intact. Because the right doors, the ones that lead to peace, will never have to be forced open. Tonight, as I turn off the lights and whisper my evening prayer, I thank God not for what I lost, but for what I gained. Clarity, peace, and the kind of love that doesn't need to be proven, only felt. The night my daughter-in-law locked me out was the night I finally stepped back into myself. And that was the greatest gift I never saw coming.